we may be guiding the largest ecosystem restoration project in the world, sounding the wake-up call on a Category 6 hurricane, producing more tech diversity than Silicon Valley, and transforming one of the most important cities in the U.S. But FIU talent also knows that making a real impact on the big challenges we all face means entering the arena, being in the room where it happens, and leading our nation's research progress. So we're doubling down on the District of Columbia. We're here to provide diverse approaches to our federal research partners and in the halls of Congress, to convene our research collaborators from across the U.S. while creating engaging academic experiences for our students and bringing the magic of Miami to the nation's capital. FIU is a leader, redefining the American Research University, delivering on educational excellence, high social mobility, and high research impact. So join us and experience FIU.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning to those of us gathered here in person, and I know we're being broadcast live on the YouTube. I'm Carlos Becerra with FIU, Florida International University, and our outpost in Washington. As we were exchanging commentary with our great friends from the German embassy, we can proudly say welcome to Miami's embassy in the nation's capital. At FIU, we're pleased to be active and assertive here in Washington, representing many of our centers and institutes. We're excited to host the Adam Smith Center this morning for obvious reasons, and I think you'll see with our action-packed panel. At FIU, we have decades and decades of collaboration with our federal partners and many of our global partners that are here in Washington, D.C. on issues such as obviously the Western Hemisphere, Central American security, forensics, partnerships with the State Department, and USAID, disaster risk resilience, et cetera. Part of that success is because of the strong support of our congressional delegation, and I know we have several of our staff members and esteemed alumni that represent the great state of Florida in Congress, as well as we enjoy very special relationships, both in the current Trump administration, a certain cabinet secretary, and of course, on the Hill, we're pleased to have a great champion in Mario Diaz-Balart, who, of course, for this issue today, plays an outsized role on the appropriations side of the House. And of course, as we followed this, I think everyone was following with quite beaming pride, not only as Miamians and South Floridians, but definitely for FIU this week that saw the confirmation and swearing in of our great alumnus, Kevin Cabrera, who will now be the ambassador to Panama. So to kick us off today, I'm excited to welcome someone I'm point of pride for many years would tune in on the TV in South Florida and see a great personality and a great great leader of public commentary and driver of tough questions, who is now part of the Adam Smith Center team. And I'm excited to kick things off by introducing Helen Aguirre Ferre.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much to Carlos for this kind introduction. My name is Helen Aguirre Ferre with the Adam Smith Center for Economic Freedom from FIU, and I'm really pleased to moderate this panel, which is related to what does America First mean for Latin America. Couldn't be a more timely topic. And to join me in this important discussion is to my immediate right, Carlos Diaz Rosillo, founder and executive director of the Adam Smith Center for Economic Freedom. Carlos, of course, is a renowned PhD from Harvard and a professor of Harvard. He and I worked together in President Trump's administration. In all candor, I was mid-level. Carlos was senior advisor to the president on various issues related to international security relating to our country. And Carlos also is now, as I said, founder and executive director of the Adam Smith. We have next to Carlos, we have Diana Alarcón, Mexico's representative to the World Bank and a distinguished fellow of the Adam Smith Center for Economic Freedom. I have to say, Diana is giving, such an exciting class to our students, a certificate program that we have that's just been, chock full of facts, information, and real life experiences related to governance and public policy, which is, a great credit to Adam Smith to make sure that we are well represented in that regard when it comes to teaching our students. And then we have next to Diana, Eric Farnsworth, Vice President, Council of the Americas and the America Society. Eric needs no introduction. You all know him here, especially in Washington, D.C. And of course, Andres Martinez Fernandez equally needs no introduction. He's Senior Policy Analyst for Latin America with the Heritage Foundation. Thank you all here for being on this panel. So, when we talk about America First, we look at this and we say, well, America First is really a policy that says, essentially, we're going to put the interests of the United States above all other interests in relation to economy, to immigration, to manufacturing, you name it, our interest should be first. From a communications perspective, that shouldn't be controversial. That should be something that we would imagine every country is really looking at policy in that same direction. Yet, when the Trump administration speaks about America First, it's also about, to some degree, reorganizing the economic world order, changing global agreements, a rejection of globalism or globalist interests, if you will. And it definitely has an immediate impact in our hemisphere with our relationships with great allies, Latin American partners, and it has an implication for those countries that are enemies of the United States, speaking specifically in this regard, Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua. So what does America First mean for Latin America when we look at, let's say, manufacturing policy? And when we look at all of these policies, and Carlos Díaz-Rosillo, let me start with you. When we look at these policies, we look at the president speaks of a number of these initiatives that have to deal with that. But the topic of the day really has to do with tariffs. You advised the president relating to tariffs. We look at friend and foe being treated alike when it comes to tariff policy. So it would appear at this point in time. Explain to us a little bit the president's vision relating to policy, and explain to us a little bit how this is going to have effects, challenges, and perhaps opportunities for Latin America.
Thank you, Helen, for the introduction, and thank you, Carlos, for hosting us. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. So the president's vision on tariffs. So I get that question asked a lot, and as I was doing different media interviews, I started talking about the top 3 reasons why President Trump is imposing tariffs, and then in the next interview, the 4 reasons, and I think I'm now at 5 reasons for why he's doing what he's doing. So let me give you a little glimpse into what I think he's thinking when it comes to the tariffs, and then we can talk about whether you think it makes sense or not. I think first and foremost, this is an issue of fairness for him. And 2 words, I think, describe this first set of reasons: fairness and reciprocity. You can disagree with what he's doing, but if you look at his public statements, not as president, not as presidential candidate, but going back to the 1980s, there's tremendous consistency in his argument about tariffs. He feels very strongly that the U.S. has been treated very poorly when it comes to a number of issues. Tariffs is one of them. When it comes to a number of countries that place tariffs on the U.S., and he feels, why is it that X country places a tariff on the U.S. and the U.S. does nothing in return? And so I think the first reason is one that is you don't think of him as a moral leader, but it's deeply embedded in his vision for what is right and what is wrong. He feels that it's wrong for countries to place tariffs on the U.S. and the U.S. not to respond in kind. So I think that's the first set of reasons why the tariffs make sense for him, and why some tariffs could be labeled, under this umbrella of reciprocity. Not all of them, but some. That's number one. Number two, national security. I think the pandemic made it clear that a big part of our supply chain is in places not only far away, but that are not friendly to the U.S. I'm talking about China for the most part, but not only China. And so it's very clear to him that for national security purposes, we need to rebuild our industrial base, and a lot of the products that come from abroad need to be made in the U.S. for national security reasons. I think that explains the aluminum, the different tariffs that he has placed to rebuild the industrial base for national security purposes. Related to that, as part of the same reason, he feels very strongly that when you look at the bilateral relationship between the U.S. and another country, the trade balance is an important element to look at, also for national security purposes. So he likes it when the U.S. has a positive trade balance with a country, any country. Economists might disagree and say that the trade balance is just one piece, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be having a negative relationship because you have a negative trade balance. But for him, the trade balance is important for national security purposes. So I think that's the second reason. Third, for him, it's important to rebuild this industrial base not only for national security reasons, but also for cultural reasons. Many jobs, thousands of jobs, hundreds of thousands of jobs that were key to the America way of being, especially in certain parts of the country, like the Midwest, although I would say it's not only the Midwest, were shipped overseas when the U.S. started doing trade deals with other countries. A lot of these jobs went to China, and so he feels that some people argue, well, doesn't he understand that economists believe that free trade is good for everyone, and globalization has been good overall for the world economy, and global output has increased as a result of globalization, and prices have gone down overall, and wages have gone up overall. And the key question here is, or the key word here is overall. Yes, it is true that global output has gone up. It is true that global wages have gone up. It is true that prices overall have gone down. But that doesn't mean anything to the factory worker in Ohio or to the auto worker in Michigan that, yes, is seeing the cost of this chair go down, but no longer has a job. And so part of the reason why he thinks the tariffs make sense is because he feels that some of those jobs, clearly not all those jobs are not going to come back, but if some of the jobs come back as a result of this reindustrialization, then he'll be happy with it. And he'll be able to claim that some jobs, we can debate, it's an empirical question, how many of those jobs will actually come back, but some will inevitably come back. And so, again, to the factory worker in Ohio or the auto worker in Michigan, it means nothing to if a Nobel Prize winning economist shows a graph that shows that overall things are better off for the world. Well, for him, having the peasant in China be better off means nothing. He wants to be better off, or she wants to be better off. And so that is important for him. Fourth, it's a very pragmatic reason. And regardless of who ends up paying for the tariff, whether it's the producers who are going to absorb the cost or the consumers who are going to get the costs passed down to him or her, and that we can debate, what cannot be debated because it's a fact, is the fact that the U.S. government will be collecting the tariff. And so it would allow him to say, at the end of the day, that X billions of dollars are coming in because of his tariffs. Again, you can argue that maybe imports will go down, and then growth will go down, and prices will go up, and things are going to be worse off. You can have that discussion. He will counter that. But the fact is that the U.S. government, his government, right, will now have X billions of dollars that we'll be able to use for paying down the debt or whatever. So money will be coming in, and he'll be getting credit for that. And fifth, there's no way to deny that this is also a negotiating tool. He was asked recently in one of the press encounters in the Oval Office, something to the effect of, Mr. President, some people in your administration are saying that these policies, these tariffs are here to stay. that they're not a negotiating tool, that you believe in them and they're here to stay. Other people in your administration are saying that it's a negotiating tool. Which one is it? And he said, both. And I do think it's both and more. I mentioned 5 reasons. It is a negotiating tool as well, in addition to a deep-held belief that reciprocity is important, that there's national security concerns, all these things that I mentioned. It's also a negotiating tool that allows him to sit down in a negotiating table with the leader of another country and get something that he otherwise would not be able to get. When an American president says that he's going to levy a 25% tariff on our closest ally to the south, like Mexico, or 145% to China, nobody would believe that. In this case, they believe it because he will do it. And so it's a negotiating tool that allows him to get something that he would otherwise not get. That's why you keep on hearing that over 70 countries have come to him or to the administration to strike a deal. And for him, striking a deal is important. So I think to understand tariffs and the way he places tariffs, you need to understand that for him, a tariff is not just an economic tool. It's an economic tool, but it's also a political tool that allows him to get what he otherwise would not be able to get. And I think that helps to explain why, in his mind, tariffs make a lot more sense than in the minds of an economist.
And of course, the tariff proposal doesn't sit in isolation with other policies that have to do with tax reform, making the tax cuts permanent, the price of oil, energy, independence, so on and so forth. Diana Alarcón, from Mexico. So you look at this and you say, well, reciprocity, when it comes to tariffs, what is wrong with that? But in the case of Mexico, there is also the discussion of what was formerly known as NAFTA, the industrialization, the growth of manufacturing in Mexico. This is going to have a very definite impact in when we look at the automotive industry. How is it seen in Mexico? Is it look like the United States is becoming adversarial or is adversarial? Or is there actually, as Carlos suggests, a real opportunity for negotiation?
Well, first of all, I will thank you for the invitation to be here. It's always a pleasure to be with a distinguished panel with different ideas and positions in relation to things. So it's an opportunity to think out of the box about these various issues that are so challenging for Mexico, at least at this point. What is wrong with reciprocity in relation to Mexico? Nothing is wrong with it. We have a USMCA with 0 tariffs. So we're very happy to hear that there is a policy of reciprocity, because that means just a continuation of a great deal, trade deal that we have, which was actually signed and agreed by President Trump on the first term in his administration. We are in a very challenging and changing world, of course. And it's not just the geopolitical of the current situation, but it's also a very rapid change on technology, on political paradigms and interest of the different countries. So this is these are the times, these historical times where big waves with big changes are taking place. And this is where governments will shift the direction of their policies. And this is precisely what is happening in Mexico. You mentioned NAFTA, 1994, we signed a North American Free Trade Agreement that basically meant 0 tariffs and a greater integration in terms of our value chain, in terms of production. After 30-something years, we realized that this is time to shift gears and to rethink about national security issues, about the well-being of our people in Mexico. And this is precisely the proposition of Claudia Sheinbaum when she came to Mexico. She came up with this idea of Plan Mexico. Plan Mexico is nothing but the reindustrialization of the country, rethinking our manufacturing base with 2 objectives. One is to increase job creation. We realized that the type of jobs that we developed with NAFTA were not necessarily the best type of jobs, not necessarily the quantity and the quality of jobs we needed. So Plan Mexico has the intention of promoting and investing on the production sectors, of the manufacturing sectors that will make the most sense for Mexico, which will create jobs, good quality jobs, with innovation and technological upgrading, increasing productivity. So Plan Mexico is a way to think about Mexico at the center, which is a point that Carlos was saying. It is perfectly legitimate it is actually the job description of presidents to think about their people first. So Plan Mexico is about putting the national interest of Mexico and Mexican people at the center, which means obviously a new set of policies, a new policy box to promote specific sectors of the country. Now, we also have to be very pragmatic. And it is true, and we're not going to change reality, that value chains in North America are very strongly interlinked. If you think about any car you buy in the United States has been produced by three countries at least: Canada, Mexico, the United States. This is something that you don't change overnight. This is the kind of production chains that are built over long periods of time. In the case of automobile industry, for 30 years. So we can change that through trade policy. Yes, you can. Over the next decade, 2 decades, we will be able to reshift production. But it's something that we need to understand. It's going to take time, and it's going to take time for each country to adjust to a new reality. Tariffs obviously are part of the policy tools of every policy maker, and it's legitimate to use as a matter of promoting your industry and so on. But pragmatism also in the case of Mexico is going to be important. So we are promoting pharmaceutical industry, increasing national content in our automobile production, electronics, and so on, with the hope or with the interest of job creation at the center, but also understanding that we are part of a larger region. Now, President Sheinbaum has said this several times. Production in Mexico, the structure of production in Mexico does not compete with production in the United States. We are very complementary. There are parts of production in the automobile industry, the electronics, agriculture, just to name a few. There are parts of production that will be very difficult to shift back to the United States. They are very labor intensive. They depend on natural resources. In the case of tomatoes, for example, there are only a very few regions in the United States that can produce tomatoes. So there are natural endowments. There is what we economists call comparative advantages that will make us better as complementary economies and not as competitors. So making America great again is an opportunity for Mexico to rethink its production base, to strengthen the kind of industrial relations, manufacturing value chains that we have with North America. This is an opportunity for us to strengthen Plan Mexico, which is a plan thinking about national security and the interest of Mexico as well. And we think that, it is in this changing world, in this new geopolitics, it is an opportunity to strengthen what we have in North America as the most competitive region, as the strongest economically.
Thank you. So, Eric, when you look at this, Make America Great Again is also Make America Grow Again. We saw that globalism really hollowed out American manufacturing. You see that Mexico is looking to not only retain its manufacturing base, but build upon it, look at the new opportunities that are out there. So when you look at this and you see these opportunities, are these opportunities and challenges complementary to the United States plan to really restore economic security for the United States? And can the United States really just look at economic security within itself and not look at it in a more global, or in this case, hemispheric perspective?
Well, Helen, thanks for the question and thanks for the invitation. I'm going to try to get through this. As you can tell, I've been sucking down the tea, and my voice is not what it normally is, the robust, energetic, lively voice that I usually bring to these conversations. But it is a privilege to be here and to follow such distinguished two speakers before me and to hear from another one right after me. So it's a great opportunity to be here, and I do wish everybody a happy Maundy Thursday as you get ready for Easter this Sunday. Well, it's a tough question what Helen asked, so let me try to take it in a couple different ways. The first is America first. If you look at it from a tariffs perspective and what that might mean for Latin America, it could be a huge opportunity. And the reason why is not because of the tariffs, and I think we've had a really good discussion about what's behind those from the president's perspective and what it means. And look, they're here, and whatever the purpose is and wherever they end up, that's the reality. But Latin America, for whatever reason, came off less bad than the rest of the world. Tariffs were put on super high on Asia. That's a technical term, super high for the economists here, Deanna, right? But for most of Latin America and the Caribbean, the tariff rate was a standard 10%. Now, that still is a head scratcher for countries like Peru, which have a trade deficit with the United States, which have been partners with the United States on all kinds of different things, which has a free trade agreement. So we can have that discussion as to whether that's a wise policy. But the fact is, it's a policy. And a country like Peru with a 10% tariff really could work to get those changing supply chains, those shifting supply chains that are now going to be, if all of things go forward, super inconvenient from the Asia perspective. And as manufacturers look to resource, reshore, nearshore, friendshore, call it whatever you want, but it's basically moving from high-cost production areas to lower-cost production areas. They're going to be looking to change from Vietnam, perhaps, to countries in the Western Hemisphere. That's a massive opportunity for Latin America and the Caribbean. Frankly, it's something that should have been going on already. During the pandemic, I and many others were saying, guys being Latin America, take advantage of this opportunity. The supply chains issue is real. We're not going to create everything in terms of supply chains in the United States. We're not an autarkic country like North Korea. It's impossible economically, and it's just foolish to even talk about that. But what we could do is shift supply chains so that they're more secure for the United States in regions that are closer to the U.S., that are among friendly governments, that are consistent with U.S. values and interests, and where we really have a better sense of security and resilience, because there is going to be another pandemic, and there is going to be another global disruption, and whether we like it or not, we're going to have to be prepared for it, and right now we're not. So this is the question, is how do you prepare the United States, America first, for the coming disruptions that are going to occur? And let me give you, everybody focuses on the pandemic because it's the most recent experience for all of us, and fortunately and thankfully we're out of it, and hopefully another one won't come for a good long time. But there's another issue here that has to be addressed. The president's talked about it, his senior advisors have talked about it, many others have talked about it, and that's the whole supply chains and semiconductors. Semiconductors are critical components of the global economy. You cannot run a global economy without them. And the source of semiconductor supply is overwhelmingly in Asia, overwhelmingly in Taiwan, South Korea, Japan, and a couple other countries. That is immediately at risk if there's a geopolitical incident that implicates Taiwan, for example, or South Korea, for example, or just makes supply chains more complicated coming from Asia. But there are countries in the Western Hemisphere that already have ecosystems that can take on the production of semiconductors. Mexico is one of them. Costa Rica is one of them. You have other countries like Panama and Dominican Republic, which are already well advanced in terms of semiconductor supply chains. And then you have countries like Argentina, which clearly has a special relationship with the United States right now, which is very interested in moving forward in these ways. So if we think creatively within the context of the new environment, there are huge opportunities opportunities here for us. But what we have to do is we have to be ambitious. We have to be ambitious, right? Because it's not just going to happen on its own. I think the countries of Latin America really, just as Diana was saying, I totally agree with that. Look, Latin America has to put Latin America first. Presidents get elected to support their own citizens, not, citizens in other countries. Fair enough. But this is one way to bring those high-quality jobs, build those ecosystems and all that. Now, the obvious question is that something that the United States would support? Because the whole president's agenda is to bring manufacturing jobs back to the United States. Fair enough. But all those jobs are not economically, could not be economically supported in the United States. The lower value parts of the supply chains, those aren't going to come to the United States. So why not locate them in the Costa Ricas and Dominican Republics and Mexicos of the world? Why not work with those countries in a collaborative way to build that type of relationship? I just had an article in the National Interest, which has gotten a lot of positive attention. And it suggested the idea of a semiconductor supply chain compact, with certain countries in Asia, with certain countries in Latin America, and with North America. And the idea being that for strategic and economic reasons both, this is something we really need to sit down and start talking about. We need to think about differently. What happens if China moves on Taiwan, right? Well, it's going to be a problem, not just for economic and for security and geopolitical issues. It's going to be a huge problem for the global economy. Right? And so that's something I think we have to forward look and see how can we discount that, how can we build against it, how can we prepare for that, Helen, in a way that prepares us for the obvious challenges that may be coming forward. One other quick note before my voice gives out and I give it to Andres. I'm from the Midwest originally. I was born in Iowa. My parents were from Iowa and Wisconsin. I grew up in Illinois. I went to college in Indiana. I married a woman from Ohio. My sister lives in Missouri. I have my brother and my mother now live in Indiana. There's nobody more Midwestern than I am. There just isn't, right? My whole life. And I've seen the communities that Carlos is talking about. I've seen Southern Ohio hollowed out. I've seen these economies. I've lived them. I get it. But the way to address those issues is not to disadvantage the other folks in the Midwest, for example, the agriculture producers, by tariffs that are going to shift markets against them. So you have to have a balance here. You have to have a sense of this is an ecosystem that's going to adjust, and it's not going to be something that you can just take one action in the vacuum, because there are going to be other actions that will react to that. And so, for example, I'm not predicting this to be the case, but it's certainly a possibility. If the relationship with Mexico fundamentally changes, I think we can assume that there will be higher tariffs on U.S. agriculture exports. I think that's natural. Mexico has a very strong and appropriate agriculture sector. That's going to impact Midwestern agriculture producers, right? Because Mexico's our top market. Canada's our second. And Canada is a country that supplies a huge amount of fertilizer to the United States, potash, right? I was in Seattle a couple weeks ago. I was lecturing on just on a seminar out there, and the local news, I'm not talking, CNN or Fox or anything. The local news, which I turned on and listened to that evening in the hotel room, was full of stories about local farmers who were terrified because the inputs from Canada were going to go up dramatically because of the tariffs, and their markets were going to go away in Mexico. So they're getting squeezed from both sides. And these aren't people that are politically, terribly political. They're not sophisticated folks in Washington and lobbyists and all this. These are people trying to make a living based on agriculture and based on all the things we would claim to support in the United States. So these are things that I think we have to take a look at. Everything's related in an economic perspective, and once we start, it's like a balloon. Once we start pushing on one side, you're gonna get a reaction somewhere else. And I think these are the issues that have to really be thought through. But having said that, there are real opportunities here. And I think it would be incumbent on Latin American and Caribbean leaders themselves, and frankly Canadian, to try to take advantage of the environment which we all face these days. I made it through the initial comments, and I didn't croak like a frog.
There you go. Good. Excellent. So, Andres, Eric leaves it with, it's a great opportunity for Latin America and the Caribbean. And in a way, when we talk about these conversations related to tariffs and the Trump administration position towards the rest of the world, we focus on what the Trump administration's doing. But Eric raises a good point. What about what the opportunity and what initiatives Latin American leaders in particular can take in this regard? We see that over 70 countries are very interested in working with the administration and in negotiations. We look at this, but the United States has really been absent from Latin America in a positive sense for many years. We can't be surprised about China's encroachment in Latin America because we left that vacuum available, if you want to say it that way. But so how do you see it? It's does Latin America need to step up and say, hey, we can do this and we would like to partner with you?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me and for having this conversation. I think it's really important. I think it is, as I agree completely with what Eric says about the opportunity that Latin America has. And to your question, it's not just about standing there and receiving this bounty of supply chains and benefits from U.S. investment. There are real actions that have to be taken, I think, on two sides. One has to be attracting those supply chains. And Latin America has a lot of challenges as far as its business environment, its attractiveness to the private sector, which has, in the case of Mexico, for example, in particular, I think undermined the benefits that it has received as far as its positioning with reshoring and nearshoring of supply chains. So that's a very significant aspect that needs to change because while the global dynamics may be incentivizing a shift in supply chains, at the end of the day, the private sector has to see that moving their corporate footprint into a country is going to be stable and profitable. And in a lot of Latin America, that's a dubious proposition. So I think an agenda of reform is really needed on one end, on the economic side, and then on the other side, the United States, under the Trump administration, I think is very clearly interested in bolstering its economic engagement with the hemisphere. As Eric noted, that's evident in part through the tariff levels that have been announced, but also we see the really amazing engagement from Secretary Rubio, Secretary Hegseth. Our Treasury Secretary was just in Argentina. There's a desire to bolster those economic ties. However, there are very real national security considerations that have to be taken into account, and that's certainly what the Trump administration has been focused on in its conversations in the Western Hemisphere. And those concerns include the narco-trafficking threat that's been the focus of the Mexico conversation, where fentanyl, which is just a scourge, killing 100,000 people in the United States every year, along with other illicit drugs, mass migration, all of this being controlled by and weaponized by the cartels and other criminal organizations. President Trump is very clearly focused in on this issue and linked it to the economic relationship, saying that if we do not have a sustainable security environment and cooperation, then that's going to jeopardize the economic relationship. And I think that's beginning to be received as a message and bear some fruit. I hope it continues to do so. So that's on one side. I think on the other side is the China issue, which we've seen in the engagement with numerous countries. Panama, I think, probably is the most prominent, but obviously China has bolstered its influence across the Americas in a worrying way, and I think it's going to be an issue with numerous countries as far as our increased economic engagement with the hemisphere. And it's a necessary concern for the administration because, as Eric highlighted, China is an increasingly aggressive and militaristic regime. It has designs on Taiwan, which it has made very clear, and the likelihood of a conflict in Asia, which could extend more broadly, is increasingly real, and that has to be taken into account, in particular when we're talking about our supply chains. So obviously, the presence of those supply chains in China, particularly those critical supply chains like pharmaceuticals, semiconductors, other critical supply chains where we are really dependent right now, has to be extracted. I think that's one of the priorities of the administration, and I think the Western Hemisphere is the region which the administration seems to have a special interest in having an increased presence. Certainly in the United States, primarily, but beyond that as well. Now, the challenge is that if we have our supply chains, for example, through a new America Crece, or there's the Americas Act, which is going through Congress. There's other initiatives which would be important tools and support that kind of reshoring of those supply chains with support from the United States government. If we expend those resources, expend increased investment in the Western Hemisphere to attract those supply chains into, for example, a country where China controls vital infrastructure through which those supply chains will flow, does it really offer the sufficient level of security for our supply chains in the case of a conflict with China? I think the question is very much up in the air, and I think in a lot of cases, in Panama, for example, that's the core of the concern. Do we want to have our supply chains going through the Panama Canal when we cannot sufficiently assure its security in the case of a conflict? I think the administration is taking very concerted action on that front because of that concern. There are other cases beyond Panama, Peru. Certainly, we have this megaport. Again, it's a megaport controlled by China. Do we want to have? Can we afford to have rather all our critical mineral supply chains or others going through Chinese-controlled infrastructure and ports? As we know, there's no real distinction between a Chinese private sector entity and the Chinese government and military. In the case of a conflict, a Chinese company is obliged to obey and cooperate with the Chinese military. And I think China very much has this private sector presence in the Western Hemisphere in mind, with a geostrategic approach and potentially to disrupt and undermine the United States stability and security. One of the clearest examples recently of that is the decision of China to halt a deal to sell these two ports in Panama that are controlled by a Chinese company. The company clearly saw in its own interest, in its economic private sector interest, to sell these ports. The Chinese government decided to step in and say no. It's not. The argument obviously isn't because of a private sector or business proposition. It's because of a geostrategic and control concern and priority. So, once again, we have to. The United States has to see this Chinese threat in that light as well. And for going back to the original question, for Latin America, countries in the region really have to step up and recognize these concerns and work with the United States to address that. Because again, the United States has limited resources. It's not China. We don't have Belt and Road. We don't control our private sector. And we're going to have to focus those on the countries where we can be sure that our supply chains are most secure in the case of a conflict, in the case of broader insecurity, such as the fentanyl trafficking and other concerns. So I think that what we're going to see is an administration, the Trump administration, is going to recognize and you could say reward countries that are forward-leaning in terms of cooperating with the United States, not just on this issue, but more broadly. And I think we see that, we saw that this week with the visit of President Bukele to the White House. Obviously, there's a great deal of recognition of the role that he has taken in confronting the migration crisis. And I think when it comes to the economic engagement of the United States, I think countries that are forward-leaning on limiting the threat of China, the presence in strategic infrastructure in particular in the Americas, and limiting the malign political influence that China can exert over countries in our hemisphere, I think the administration is going to look with special emphasis to those kinds of partners when it comes to economic engagement.
You know, Carlos Díaz Rosillo, Andres makes such a good point when he talks about the issues related to national security and the Panama Canal. So you look at China stopping the American companies from buying these two ports in the Panama Canal, and it's because it is a military strategic calculation on their part that they have control and retain control over those two ports. So when you look at that, you say, well, listen, when we talk about the tariffs and we were talking about the economy, clearly we were, originally looking at, the United States is decoupling from so many areas. Mexico could be one when you look at the automotive industry, but really, aren't we really talking about the United States? Isn't the Trump administration really saying we need to decouple from China in particular? We talk about the semiconductors and our reliance, but also pharmaceuticals, which is it was so evident during COVID, our dependency, even for the masks that were, fabricated at that time. So is this really all about China?
It's mostly about China. I hope that when historians write the history of the Trump administrations, I know they're going to be very critical on a number of issues, but I hope that they give him credit for putting a spotlight on the importance of changing the way we deal with the Chinese government. For decades, the consensus right here in Washington, by both Republicans and Democrats, both in the White House, in the executive branch, and just a couple of blocks away from here in Congress, was that the way to deal with the Chinese was to engage with them. And the logic was, the more we engage with them, the more we trade with them, the more democratic they'll be, and the more capitalist they'll be, the more they're going to look like us. And after 4 decades of trying that, we realized that they're neither more democratic nor more capitalist, quite the opposite. And so I think hopefully he'll get credit for putting a spotlight on this very important issue. And I think nowadays, given all the divisions that we have in our political system, the one significant area where there is some broad agreements with Democrats and Republicans is the importance of changing our strategy when it comes to China. And that means that the Trump administration is going to insist, or is going to provide incentives for American companies to leave China. We know that they went to China for decades because of the lower cost of labor, because of the lack of regulatory oversight, for all sorts of economic reasons. And now the push is for them to come. Ideally, as an American, I would love for them to come to the U.S., 100% of them. We know that that's not realistic. They're not going to all come to the U.S. Hopefully, many will. But the ones that don't come to the U.S., the logical place for them to come is the Western Hemisphere. And that will happen not only because the U.S. will provide incentives, but because Latin American governments are going to do what it takes to make sure that these companies thrive in their countries.
Any countries in particular come to mind?
Absolutely. And here, I'm going to be a little critical of the former government of Mexico, because the logical place to take advantage of this, call it nearshoring, friendshoring, ally shoring, whatever you call it, is Mexico. Our neighbor to the south, a place where every one of these companies could come and relocate. And what we saw in the previous Mexican administration, President López Obrador, is that, in my humble opinion, there was no strategy to take advantage of nearshoring. Mexico did fairly well with nearshoring, not because of the policies of President López Obrador, but despite his policies. Some governors did a great job attracting investments. And I'm really glad to see that President Sheinbaum now has a strategy to take advantage of nearshoring and to be able to send a clear signal that Mexico Mexico welcomes these investments, which is great because Mexico will be the logical place for these companies to relocate. Now, what are the companies going to require? They're going to require judicial security, right? The rule of law. They're going to require citizen security so that their workers can go from their home to their work, from their work to their home. They're going to require macroeconomic stability, political stability. And some countries have been taking advantage of this phenomenon. That's a once in a lifetime, really, opportunity. The Dominican Republic has been doing it very well. Costa Rica has been doing it very well. But they're small economies. I think Mexico is now positioned in a way that no other country is to take advantage of this nearshoring, which, by the way, most of these companies that are leaving China, they're not coming to Latin America. They're going to Vietnam. They're going to Cambodia. Some are coming to Latin America. More should. One of the common themes of all our comments is the word opportunity. This is a tremendous opportunity for Latin America. A tremendous opportunity to take advantage of this, again, once-in-a-lifetime opportunity where American companies are looking forward to relocate.
But do they see it as an opportunity?
I think some do. I think some don't. I think the government of Colombia, for example, clearly doesn't see it. Right? There are some countries that they're missing the point. I think the government of Mexico is seeing it. I think the governments of the countries I mentioned, Dominican Republic, Costa Rica, I think Paraguay, Peru, I think there are countries that are seeing it. But it's a tremendous opportunity that's not going to come by itself. The governments of Latin America need to make sure that making America great again also means making the Americas great again, which is in the best interest not only of the U.S., but of the entire hemisphere. And I do think that because of all these reasons, we're going to see a greater emphasis on the Western Hemisphere in a way that we haven't seen before. But there's tremendous opportunity. I'm looking at Guyana, for example, right? Tremendous opportunities there as well. And so, and this is not some of these governments, this is not an ideological issue, right? Some are on the left, some are on the right, but it's about seizing the moment and creating the conditions necessary for these companies to thrive. Again, no investor is going to go to a foreign government and demand that their investment does well. That would be unreasonable. But they can demand the things I mentioned: rule of law, security, macroeconomic stability, political stability. And I think the conditions are there for Latin America to thrive in a way that again, this is not something that you're going to see happen again. Once these companies relocate from China and go somewhere else, the idea is for them to stay there for the long term. But this requires not only incentives, as I mentioned, not only incentives of the part of the U.S., but also the governments in Latin America need to create the right conditions, Latin America and the Caribbean.
Thank you. Diana, well, Mexico has been mentioned frequently, and so definitely want to give you that opportunity to respond. And also a concern that many have that Mexico does have internal challenges with the narco cartels, as so many other countries in Latin America, and that these economic pressures at this time may weaken the government of Mexico with regard to the cartels. How do you manage those pressures at the same time to make sure that as you negotiate, President Sheinbaum's government doesn't look weak and has an opportunity to really push back against these cartels, which are enemy to the United States, but enemy to the people of Mexico as well?
President Sheinbaum is at, depending on the survey, 80 to 85% approval to the Mexican people.
Which is impressive. You and I have spoken about that. It's an impressive number.
This is probably the strongest support for any government in the world at this point. So the support from people in Mexico is very strong behind her, and she's in a very strong position to lead the country with all the various challenges that she has. But I will take it from the last point that Carlos and the rest of the panelists made about the great opportunity that we have in Latin America, in the Americas, to rebuild, to rethink our region. Markets do their magic only when they have the proper incentives. Private investors will invest when there is a profit opportunity. They already set the conditions where there is a stability and where is a possibility to thrive. And it is up to governments to create those incentives, and those depend on what your goals are, what your end result is. In the case of Mexico, our end result, as I said, is to provide the kind of jobs and the kind of technological upgrading that the country needs for its own good, for its own stability, economic, social stability, but also dealing with issues of insecurity. So this is, I think, a great opportunity to think about the region as a region. Understanding that, again, markets do their magic only when there is the proper incentives to do it. And what are the kind of incentives that we need? Well, in Mexico, President Sheinbaum is very clear about that. There is a strategic direction on where she would like to stimulate investment in the different sectors, pharmaceuticals, automobile, electronics, agro-industry, and so on. And creating the conditions, it's not just about security and the legal framework, it's about the infrastructure. Creating the incentives for companies to locate in the regions of the country where we have comparative advantage to do so. If we think about this exercise at a larger geographical area for Latin America, I think that we have great opportunities to indeed bring value chains back to the region and build our economic security as a region. Going to security concerns, and I want to tie this with this opportunity we have. In the case of Mexico, our President Sheinbaum's view about security is very much related to the opportunities that people have to lead the life they want to lead. When you are a young man, a young woman, and you don't have the expectation of going to school, of having a good job, of having a good life, you get into all kinds of, you have all kinds of temptations to do what you need to do to secure the kind of well-being, the kind of life that you want to have. So the best way to deal with issues of insecurity is providing your people the good jobs, the good education, the good opportunity to do well in life. And if we think about this, not only in relation to Mexico, but in relation to our region, I think that we will be able to project a view, to create the conditions for this process of reshoring to attract a stronger economic ties, a stronger production chains that will build the security, the economic security for the region. Insecurity, I already talked about insecurity. Yes, it is a challenge. In Mexico, President Sheinbaum has indicated she has a very comprehensive strategy to deal with insecurity. At the center of that is the issue of well-being, job creation opportunities, but also, security in terms of policing, deployment of the National Guard, and so on, to deal with issues of organized crime and cartels, with cooperation, very strong cooperation and collaboration, obviously, with the United States, with respecting the sovereignty of our countries. So I just want to conclude by saying we have a great opportunity as a region. Mexico indeed has it, can see it. It's implementing a policy to attract it.
Will Mexico take a position of leadership in this regard in the hemisphere, do you think?
Well, I think that de facto it's taking a position of leadership. President Sheinbaum right now is recognized as a leader internationally, the way she has engaged in this conversation, the way she has handled the challenges that Mexico has. I think that she has indeed taken a position of leadership. There was recently a meeting of presidents in Honduras, the CELAC, and there was an agreement to call on a second meeting. She proposed to discuss the issue of bienestar, la cumbre del bienestar, the summit for well-being, and that will be an occasion, that will be, I would say, a very important opportunity to discuss these things more in depth.
And I think, Diana, it's so important that President Sheinbaum is looking at, and you've discussed it multiple times, that when we looked at the regional integration originally, yes, there was manufacturing and job creation in Mexico, but at a very low low cost to workers. So cheap labor, let's put it that way. And now you're looking at the creation of good jobs that pay better. The cheap labor introduced manufacturing, if you will, into Mexico. It gutted manufacturing in the United States, but it was cheap labor, cheap costs. Now you're looking at something much more sophisticated, something that really provides a greater economic quality for the people of Mexico.
And that's precisely the point. And if I can end with this thought, I think that we need to learn those lessons from the past. See, the wave of globalization was a wave looking for cheap labor. And that's how we industrialized many countries around the world, including Asia. You know, it was the search for cheap labor that made companies invest in other countries. And that was the case of Mexico as well. And we learned that lesson the hard way. It took us 30, 35 years to build the production chains that we have, and we are still not there yet. We have not created the kind of jobs and technological sophistication that we should have, that we had an opportunity of creating back then. We learned the lesson the hard way. We have an industrial policy nowadays that is strengthening those production links, that is strengthening the link between innovation, technological development, and industrial production, that is strengthening the connections, the flow of resources with other regions, with other countries. And for us, it is North America, because we are highly integrated to North America. So if there is one reason that we should have learned from the past 30, 40 years, is the importance of industrial policy, the importance of public policy. Again, markets will do their magic only when they have the proper incentives. And the proper incentives are created by governments.
Eric Farnsworth, so the proper incentives, how do we, are these proper incentives created by the United States? Who should take the lead in that regard? I think it's absolutely exciting that we've got a Secretary of State who and it's not to say other Secretary of States are not learned or well informed about Latin America, but I think it's fair to say that Secretary Marco Rubio really understands Latin America, not only from a policy perspective, but culturally. He feels it, he understands it, he knows it. So we have that great advantage. Of course, we have, Special Envoy Mauricio Claver Caron as well, and his work here in Washington, D.C. in the first Trump administration. There is that great opportunity, but of course the challenges exist. Does the infrastructure, you mentioned it before, rule of law, and Andres talked about it too, with the vacuum of rule of law, companies look for some type of security. There is a lot of insecurity right now that everyone feels, included with the abrupt move towards tariffs, which really wasn't so abrupt. I mean, President Trump has been talking about tariffs for as long as we can all remember. Guerra anunciada no mata soldados, as they say in Spanish. If you announce a war, well, if you're few casualties because everyone's prepared. So how surprised are we? What are the challenges that you see coming around the corner?
Your point about Marco Rubio, I think, is absolutely spot on. I've testified numerous times in the House and Senate, and every time I would testify before Senator Rubio, you knew you had to bring your A game, because he was he knows the region so well and so passionately and so effectively that he wasn't going to take a line. I mean, he was going to know if you knew what you were talking about. Fortunately, I think I passed, but his knowledge. In addition, and I think Andres mentioned it too, the number and frequency and operations tempo of senior U.S. government officials who have already been in the Western Hemisphere is extraordinary. It's not just historic; it's extraordinary. I mean, you've had Secretary Homeland Security. You've had the Secretary of State make his first trip to the region, and he's already been back to the region. You've had the Secretary of Defense. You've had, I mean, on and on and on. The Treasury Secretary is just in Argentina. So, you know, there are others as well. It's extraordinarily the amount of time and attention and prioritization that the administration is putting on the Western Hemisphere. And I think it goes to the point, Helen, of the whole panel today is to make America first work. You got to make you got to work with the Americas. It's got to be an America's first approach. And I think I really appreciate what Deanna has been talking about in terms of the integration of North America and the path forward, because if we take as a fact, and I do, what Carlos was saying, that the only way to get agreement in Washington is actually shake your fist at China. I think that's actually true. Both Republicans and Democrats and everybody in between can agree that China has a different approach. You know, from an economic and trade and business perspective, the best way to compete with China is with our closest friends, Mexico and Canada. And the point being that we have that relationship, the USMCA relationship. It's due to be renegotiated, rediscussed, reevaluated, choose your word, but something by 2026. But we also have, and this is what I really wanted to focus on, because you ask about what's the path forward and how can we cooperate with the countries in question and supply chains. There's so much on the table. But Andres actually already referred to it. He referred to the Americas Act. And the Americas Act is an extraordinary initiative. It's bipartisan, it's bicameral, and it would take the entire U.S. economic focus on the Western Hemisphere and create those incentives, Helen, that you're asking about, and create the opportunity for organizations like the DFC, which frankly have not done a very impressive job in the Western Hemisphere to this point, but have a huge opportunity to do so if they reevaluate, refocus, reprioritize, build a preference for the Western Hemisphere, help create those incentives. And the point being that that will then encourage the countries in the region to see the United States not as this country that's going to come down and just make all kinds of demands, but a partner in addressing some of the issues that we've been asking the countries themselves to take. So, for example, if we complain about Chinese investment in country X, pick your country, fair enough, but the country's leaders will tell you, as they've told me, great, what's your solution? What's your alternative? What are you bringing to the table? My people are hungry. They need investment. They need jobs. They need food. The Chinese are coming. They're not asking for a lot other than, you know, some of the things Andres is talking about. What's your solution? And I think the Americas Act helps address that issue and builds that consciousness so that the United States is seen more, and indeed is more, of an economic partner in the region. I think that's the piece that's largely been missing over the last however many number of years here in Washington. I would say that one of the most exciting things, and I've been working on Americas Act, full disclosure, since the very beginning. I've been there at the very beginning of the process, so this goes back several years. But the idea that USMCA is not just a vital part of U.S. economic strength as well as hemispheric strength, but also needs to be the platform that will be accessible to other countries in the hemisphere to accede to help build those supply chains that we've all been talking about and create those incentives that we've all been talking about. I mean, businesses will react, but the groundwork has to be laid. So, for example, what does this mean, right? Well, this means if you get again, I don't know what the word to use, renegotiation or reevaluation or whatever, but USMCA continues to go for it. Review, thank you. That's the word I'm looking for. A review of USMCA. And everybody agrees it's, you know, okay, maybe we tweak it here, maybe we tweak it there. But it's served its purpose, it's doing well, we move forward. You know, we talk about expanding supply chains into the Western Hemisphere on things like whether it's, you know, semiconductors or whether it's PPE for, you know, healthcare or whether it's auto parts or whatever it is. Why isn't Guatemala part of that discussion, right? Why isn't, you know, some of the countries of Central America more actively integrated into the North American space? The Dominican Republic, yes, but you know, these are free trade partners of the United States, and they have their free trade agreements with the other countries. But why aren't they part of the unified agreement? Right now, there's the CAFTA-DR, which is honestly showing its wear. It doesn't include all kinds of issues like digital trade, that sort of thing, and it also, frankly, includes Nicaragua, which still has a free trade agreement with the United States. That's untenable. That needs to change. But the point is, how do you build for the future and create those incentives, Helen, that you were talking about, to help draw that investment from Asia, not away from the United States? We're not talking about, you know, U.S. investors going abroad. What we're talking about is shifting supply chains from other regions of the world, and to use Diana's phrasing, the hemispheric regional security. And I think that's what we should aim at. Now, from a trade purist perspective, you're talking about trade diversion. Is that, economically maximizing in terms of the global economy? All right, well, Deanna's an economist. She can probably tell me that it isn't. But the point being that this is the world we're living in right now. And the Western Hemisphere is our hemisphere. And this is how I think we do the best to help work with our neighbors and partners to help address some of the things that are most impacting ourselves, whether it's on the economic side, job creation, security, borders, law enforcement, what have you. So these are some things that are happening right now. They're positive, they're good, and I think if we move forward, we can find a path forward. I think that will be broadly satisfying.
And Eric, I think you make such a good point that when you look at the situation, for example, with Central America, outside of Nicaragua, do you have greater opportunities? We talk about Panama, but it's not just about Panama. Is there an opportunity there really to be able to grow these trade opportunities? You mentioned Guatemala. Excellent question. Why should Guatemala not be considered and partnered with as well? And so when we look at that, and you mentioned that Nicaragua, of course, is a separate opportunity, these are policies that are actually so much more beneficial and perhaps longer lasting than traditional aid is to Latin America, because it helps them incorporate and build on the infrastructure that they currently have internally in order to be able to foment that type of investment.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And just very quickly, when I was in government in the 1990s and aid budgets were being cut back then, not to the level now, but they were being reduced in coming out of the Cold War. The Central Americans in particular were saying, look, we depend on, foreign assistance. We really need that. You can't take it away from us. And what we said was, yeah, but trade, not aid, right? So, this idea that we're going to help work for a longer term perspective. I'm not sure, to be perfectly honest, that the United States ever fully lived up to our obligations on that front. Because we used to joke subsequently that it's like, well, there was no aid, but there's no trade either, right? The point being is you have a CAF to DR agreement, but it excludes several of the most, the products that are most valuable to Central America, and on and on and on. The point being is we could do better on the trade front. And I think this gives us an opportunity to do so because we have a different perspective on the importance and value of Central America and as the Russians might say, the near abroad to the United States. Maybe it's a bad term, but it's you get the point I'm trying to make. The countries that are closest into the U.S. Yeah.
And Andres, I want to hear from you in a minute, but I also want the guests here in the audience want to open it up to questions also. So if you have any questions, please start thinking about them and then raise your hand, and we'll love to hear from you. But Andres, hemispheric solidarity, it's really the new refocus and great opportunity. Of course, there's challenges. And we look at Nicaragua, Cuba, Venezuela, the growth of China within our hemisphere. Colombia is a very serious issue as well. We have these international narco cartels that are now just, categorized as U.S. terrorists, not U.S. terrorists, but international terrorist groups. I don't think we can really talk about hemispheric solidarity without naming those countries and those challenges that we have there. How do we go forward?
Yeah, I agree. I think that we have a series of challenges that are, including many of which you mentioned, on the security front and the foreign dictatorial regimes, which are always going to undermine, or at least currently undermine very significantly, some of the opportunities that we're seeing. And I think that, like I mentioned before, making progress on the security front, confronting these security threats, is going to be a crucial part of fully realizing some of the benefits economically, politically of our this kind of potential repivot, maybe that's overstating it, but refocus onto our hemisphere from Washington, because those issues they're directly tied to trade. For example, cartels are tied into supply chains, illicit supply chains that come through. We have the big news piece of the past few years is the avocado industry in Mexico, and that's how it's been co-opted by cartels. But cartels use illicit trade infrastructure to move both illicit goods and even in human trafficking. So these are things that have to be addressed in order to fully realize the economic benefits of deeper integration in our hemisphere. To your
The
point,
United States has been very aggressive with Venezuela.
Yep. On the dictatorial regimes, that's a very similar challenge. As Eric said, we need to get serious about how we are engaging with some of those. Nicaragua, in particular, having a free trade agreement with them, I think, is to use his term, I believe, untenable and inappropriate, given the weaponization of migration and alliances with foreign regimes, hostile regimes to the U.S. That Nicaragua has engaged in. So, and the same with Cuba, Venezuela. I think these are regimes that are hostile to hemispheric stability and prosperity. They weaponize their presence in the region against their neighbors. They commit domestically, of course, terrible human rights abuses, and they seek to spread disruption and authoritarianism, and they do that through weaponizing migration, through fomenting social unrest, through clandestine activity as well. We had the Ambassador Rocha, who was discovered after a couple decades of senior leadership in the U.S. government at the highest levels. It's the one Cuban spy we found in the past 2 decades. There's only one, and he made it. Ana Montes, that was how long ago?
Montes,
That was,
and then
well, I guess that was
Manuel
2000.
Rocha. But Manuel
2001.
Rocha, I think, was the latest.
But my point is, we've had these 2 cases in the past 25 years, and they both somehow made it to the top levels of the U.S. government, but there's no one further down. I don't buy that. And we know that these regimes, as well as China, are deeply embedded in the Western Hemisphere, in the United States, but also in partners of the U.S. I was just in Ecuador, where there's a very significant Chinese and Russian presence, clandestine. Argentina as well. They have been able to leverage this economic presence and political presence and turn it into a weapon of malign influence. We've seen that across the hemisphere. So it's really incumbent on the U.S. and its partners in the region to confront these threats in order to maintain stability and maximize this opportunity that we have.
Thank you. Any questions from the audience? I can keep going, but if there are any questions, we definitely want to open it up. Yes, sir. Your name and who you're with, please?
I'm Sven Pruse with the German Embassy here in DC. Thank you very much for the
Welcome.
Thank you. Sven Pruse with the German Embassy here in DC. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for your insights that are very, very helpful. I do have a question that touches on the point of incentives. And for me, the question is, in a polarized region that we have in the Southern Hemisphere, we saw the runoff election now in Ecuador that could have gone both ways. We also see issues that are not linked to economics, like the water issue with Mexico, that lead or could lead to tariffs. How do you see that? How much of a disadvantage or disencouragement for the companies is it to relocate into the Western Hemisphere? And what could the administration do about it when you, as you mentioned, see tariffs as a political tool?
Carlos.
So, I think, as was mentioned before, right? Companies are going to go, investors are going to go where they see an opportunity for profits. That's what companies do. Right? That's what the private sector does. And so I think you're absolutely right. If you have the right political conditions, the right economic conditions, but you don't have the basic infrastructure so that your business can thrive, you're not going to relocate there. That's why it's so important for Latin American governments to take proactive steps to make sure those conditions exist. The U.S. government can provide as many incentives as it can come up with. But if pick your country, doesn't provide the basic needs of that company so that it can be profitable, they're simply not going to go. And what you're seeing in Latin America is that there are multiple countries that are vying for those investments, right? I mentioned a few. I mentioned Paraguay, I mentioned Peru, I mentioned Guyana, I mentioned Costa Rica, Dominican Republic. I think none are better positioned than Mexico, obviously. But there isn't only one option, right? There's multiple options, and I think it's up to Latin American governments to make sure that they provide the basic infrastructure that these companies need to be able to be profitable. So part of it is, yes, incentives, but the biggest part is not incentives, it's actually the right conditions on the ground provided by those governments. A lot of it can be done by the private sector, but ultimately the government has to provide those conditions so that the companies can actually be profitable. If anybody else wants to add anything.
Jump in, Deanna.
No, I could agree with you completely. The only thing I could add is for those conditions to be created, you also need stability, signs of stability. So once the turmoil recedes on, the conversation we're having now, we are hoping there is going to be a space to think about longer term. There is a cost of adjustment in the short term, and this is the case anywhere on any major shift of direction. But very soon we will need to provide signs of stability over longer periods of time. Investments, especially nowadays, especially on the kind of things that we are talking about, pharmaceuticals, electronics, semiconductors, and so on, those are large, huge investments, and they need stability on the longer term. And stability is not just security and infrastructure and the rule of law, but it is also public policy, the kind of incentives that you offer for companies to have a stable framework for profits and for growth.
Just one more thing, because we've emphasized a lot the role of governments in the region in providing the necessary conditions, and that's critical, but also the private sector in the Western Hemisphere, in Latin American countries, is critical. American companies would want to have partners, local partners in the private sector. And so a word of encouragement to Latin American companies to look at potential partnerships and to look at the United States not as one massive country, but as 50 manageable, smaller countries, right? And so there are tremendous opportunities in the states. Different states are doing different things, and Helen's going to be heading a very exciting project at the center. This is a plug for that. On state governments, what governors are doing, what mayors are doing at the local level in the U.S. There are a lot of opportunities in our states. Some states are doing it much better than others. Some communities are doing it much better than others. I'm biased, but I think the state of Florida is doing a great job in promoting investment and providing the conditions so that businesses can thrive. But Latin American companies also could step up to the plate and be more proactive in looking for partners so that American companies can partner with them and do business in Latin America, but also for Latin American companies to come to the U.S. and do business in the U.S. in conditions, in some states at least, that are tremendously profitable for them.
So when we look at this, are there any questions? Any more questions out there? Yes, sir.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we
Yes,
can.
my name is Guillermo Areas with BMW Group from Germany. My question is the following, and I'll start with a comment. I travel extensively in Latin America. I'm in charge of Latin America government relations, and I've seen and heard for the last 6 months a huge plummeting of confidence of Latin American governments on the U.S. in the ambiguities and the relationship. What steps can the U.S. make to rebuild this trust as soon as possible with Latin American countries. Let's look at it from the perspective of Latin Americans, not from the U.S.
Which is important. So Latin America looks at the U.S., sees ambiguous arguments, conversations, sometimes maybe even seen as adversarial towards Latin America. How do you remedy that? Andres, do you want to take a stab, and then Carlos?
Sure, yeah. Easy question. So I do think that what, as Eric has mentioned and others here, what we are still lacking is a very robust and positive economic engagement agenda, which I know that there are very serious discussions around what that will look like practically in the administration and in Congress, and we've talked about some of those. And I think that once, and I'm confident that we'll have very real opportunities and tools that are going to be added into the U.S. toolbox to offer that in the region. I think that once that is present, we'll be able to shift maybe some of the concerns that you're highlighting. At the same time, I think it is incumbent on Latin American governments and others to look past the noise and see the opportunity that exists, because it's real. And again, I don't think that it's necessarily going to be directed broadly. I think that it's going to be, again, determined not only by business environment conditions, although certainly in part, but also particularly for governments by that underlying stability and partnership which they're able to offer for the United States. So I think, and I know that there are countries and governments in the region. I've traveled a lot over the past few weeks and met with multiple heads of state. I know that there are people who get it. There are people who don't also. And part of that is incumbent on the U.S. to make that case more positively. But I think regional leaders also need to recognize the opportunity and again, look past the noise.
Andres, is it so? It could be called noise, but at the same time, you have your own public perception within your own countrymen as to, how to face that. It's very difficult when the United States is coming across, perhaps in the perception of some, as not looking at Latin America respectfully, as equal partners. What do you think?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I think that there's always going to be people who say that's the case. I was just in Ecuador for the elections, and we had, I think, one of the strongest pro-U.S. leaders in the region there, reelected by a margin of 13%. And despite people on the left and in opposition attacking him as being a vassal of the United States or not sufficiently defending Ecuador's interests, in the end, these were hollow attacks because I think people, in part, recognize that the United States is a valuable partner and the opportunity that partnership presents. Because that was one of the clearest distinctions in those elections. We have other elections coming up in the region, and everything I'm seeing and trends seem to indicate that wave, if you want to call it a wave, is likely to continue in a number of elections, and we're likely to have leaders who again see the positive benefits and the importance of partnership with the United States.
They see the opportunity. They actually do get through the noise.
So for some, yeah.
Carlos.
I think whenever you have a new sheriff in town, you're likely to have a period of transition and you're likely to have uncertainty, especially when that sheriff is trying to change the way we do business and when the international economic system that has been in place for for 3/4 of a century is now being questioned. And the question is very simple. Is it working as it should be working, in his case, for the American people, and in other cases for the people of the countries that they represent? And so I understand the uncertainty, and I understand why some people might feel that things are in flux. They are in flux. I think they're going to be better than they were before. But I totally understand the uncertainty. And if there's one message, I think, to conclude, which ties to the title of the panel, is that America first doesn't mean America alone. I think there's a misconception that for the Trump administration, America first means America alone. And I think nothing could be further from the truth.
Correct.
America first, yes, means putting the rights of the Americans, of American citizens first, as Diana mentioned, as every president needs to do as part of their job description, as you mentioned. But that doesn't mean that we're going to work alone. That doesn't mean that we don't care about partnerships.
We're not withdrawing from the world.
Quite the opposite.
Becoming insular.
Quite the opposite, right? It's trying to shape the new world order in a way that benefits our interests in the same way that President Sheinbaum will be doing the same thing for Mexicans, and every other head of state will be doing for their countries. President Trump was not elected to be the Secretary General of the UN or to be popular in Brussels or in any other part of the world. He was elected to represent the interests of the American people. And again, I can understand the uncertainty in the US and around the world, but I think that comes with the territory. We have somebody who's doing things differently. And if we look at it in the long term, I think the outcome is going to be much better for us and much better for Mexico and for other countries, but that will take time.
Diana, final thoughts from you and Eric.
I can see and I can identify with that thought about uncertainty at a time of change. And we went through that precisely in Mexico 2018. If you know a little bit about the history of Mexico, in 2018, we got not only a president from a different political coalition than we had had in the past 70, 80 years, but someone who was committed to reform and to change substantially public policy and the vision of public policy and Mexico's future over the longer term. And it did take a period of uncertainty and instability. Carlos just mentioned López Obrador did not have a clear policy or didn't come out with a clear policy for reindustrialization and the attraction of investment. I think he did. But part of the reason perhaps why there is that perception is because there are so many other things that had to be fixed in the country before we were able to put our policies together and have a Plan Mexico that we have right now. So yes, there is a period of uncertainty and instability whenever you have a major shift and a major change in your public policies. That's very challenging. But I will say again what I just mentioned in my previous intervention, which is we are hoping, this is from Mexico's perspective, we're hoping very soon we will have a clear direction on where we are going in terms of a region. We do think, we do see the opportunities to improve the integration of the Americas. Very much, we have seen the Americas Act, and we think that it's very positive. It's very hopeful. For us in Mexico, the issue of job creation south of the border, our border, towards Central America, is so important. Just for migration purposes, one way to prevent people feeling forced to pick up your bags and leave your family, your country, the people you know, is because of lack of opportunity. So to the extent that we're able to rebuild and provide job opportunities and good living for people south of the border from us, which is Central America, but also South America, the more stability and prosperity we'll see in the region, and the greater opportunities for Mexico, if you can see it, as a selfish perspective, the greater opportunities we will have for us in Mexico. So stability is going to be important. Having clear signs of where we are going, what is the direction we are navigating in the next few years is going to be very, very important. That has been the effort we are making in Mexico of President Sheinbaum. That's Plan Mexico. And we are trying to think, outside of the box, how to generate a momentum for other countries to come to this conversation and realize that we are going to be stronger together. That together is not the summation of each one of us. Together we can be stronger.
Eric, this realignment, necessary, important, inevitable, if you will, at this point anyway. Your final thoughts.
I love Diana Alarcón, but I hate following her because she's so good. So let me try to squeak out some final thoughts. Just a couple things, Helen. Thank you very much for that. Look, every dollar that the United States imports from Mexico represents 40 cents of input from the United States. Every dollar that the United States imports from Canada represents 25 cents of U.S. content. Mexico is orders of magnitude larger than Canada. Canada's number 2. From China, the amount of U.S. content in terms of imports of Chinese products is 4%. So when we import from Mexico, it represents literally 10 times more U.S. content than when we import from China. So when Mexico grows, the United States grows. So when Deanna's talking about mutual growing together and partnership, it's real because it's not, imports and exports are not some just disaggregated thing. They depend on working together to build the economies together to be able to compete against China. And if that's our ultimate goal, which I think, I can't speak for everybody, but I think most of the folks on the panel would suggest that it is, at least internationally economically, then we can't do it without Mexico and Canada. We can't. And so this has to be, I think, at the fundamental root of our, the basis of our economic relations in the Western Hemisphere, because these are our 2 closest and 2 largest neighbors. I would completely concur, Guillermo, with your point about trust. I absolutely agree. And trust is the coin of the realm in diplomacy, international relations. And I think what you're going to see is countries will be hedging their bets more. They'll be hedging their bets. And it's normal. Companies will be hedging their bets. Will you invest the same amount of money as you otherwise would based on an uncertain future? You probably won't. You'll probably invest it somewhere else, or you'll invest it differently, or you'll hedge it a little bit differently, or what have you. So this is also going to have economic implications. And it's not necessarily something you could measure. I mean, you can't prove a counter negative. You can't measure something that didn't happen, right? You can only measure something that did happen. So investment that isn't made or that is made suboptimally because it's not, it's not to its highest use, that's going to have an economic cost. And that at the street level, that's job creation, that's community resilience, that's the ability to pay taxes so that services can be provided by governments, all of these things that I think we would support and want. How do you build and maintain that trust? Guillermo, that's a separate panel, which I'm not going to go into now, but I think it's to be continued. And Helen, I just want to thank you again and everybody here at FIU for the great opportunity.
Well, on behalf of FIU, the Adam Smith Center for Economic Freedom, we'd like to thank very much Carlos Diaz-Rosillo, Diana Alarcón, Eric Farnsworth, and Andres Martinez Fernandez for being with us today. And of course, to all of you who joined us this morning, thank you very much. And yes, this will be continued.